So, welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews, where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes, their challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this afternoon, I'm delighted to have with us Juliette Alban-Metcalfe, who's CEO at Real World Group. So, Juliette, thank you for spending a bit of time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience, what you do, how you help people, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me.
Very welcome.
Real World Group's been around since 2001, and during that time, we've basically helped many, many businesses in the UK and around the world. We work with a lot of public sector organisations, we work with central government organisations, and we work with a lot of private sector organisations as well. So basically, any sector you can think of.
Yeah,
And the reason why we exist is because we're really passionate about, in essence, bringing humanity back into the workplace and creating the conditions where people can thrive and therefore productivity, you know, is optimized and
yeah,
performance is optimized because of the way that leaders behave day to day with their people. And that includes boards and
yeah.
non-execs. And it's also it encompasses things like team working, a team's actually working in the most effective way. So
Brilliant.
the way we do that is directly through consulting with organizations, but we also accredit coaches around the world to use our assessment tools, which are based on our research. This is a very long introduction, Chris. Apologies.
Brilliant. Keep going.
Based on our research, we have these assessment tools we've created because we're psychologists effectively.
Brilliant.
Um, and then people become accredited to use them with their own clients, so that their own boards, their own individual leaders and teams and that sort of thing.
Brilliant, brilliant. So just sort of on that, if anyone watching right now, what would be might be a trigger or a couple of triggers that would help them go, yes, this is the right time for me to engage with you. What sort of challenges do you find people face a lot that you really help them solve?
Well, probably the biggest one would be productivity or performance challenges.
Great,
So if team's not performing well or the
great,
business isn't realizing its potential, 9 times out of 10, that'll come down to leadership. Now, it
great.
might be because of managerial competencies, people not having clear objectives, not being performance managed, that sort of thing. But it could equally be, and probably more often, and this is where the big opportunity lies, is that leaders aren't getting the best out of their people.
Yeah,
And they
brilliant.
might have the best intentions in the world. We see an awful lot of leaders like that who really, want to maximize people's potential because they see the value in it and they want to do the right thing because it's a win-win, but
Yeah,
they just don't know how. So
brilliant.
it would be, productivity issues, it would be well-being issues, everyone's really stressed, people are demotivated, or it could be that they have data from something like an engagement survey that says people are not
Great.
happy here. So there's a number of triggers, but it would be basically you're not getting the results that
Yeah,
you want.
brilliant. Oh, that's fantastic. That brings me to mind a little bit of we had our founder over here, Brad Sugars, last towards middle of last year, and he was telling the story of he had one of his clients and they came and said, "Oh, the team aren't performing. It's terrible." And the senior team, and he says, and Brad said, "Great, so let's mark them all out of 10. So just bear with me." And he said, "Well, they're a 5 and a 4 and a 6," and he did all that. Blah, blah, blah. And then Brad said, who do you think that's a measurement of?" And what do you mean?
Mm.
Well, it's a measurement of your leadership.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's absolutely right because at the end of the day, what we find when we start talking to leaders is it's kind of that's a very classic scenario, as I'm sure you know, Chris,
Yes,
being a coach yourself, is that people are pointing the finger elsewhere, but it's been many decades since people like Stephen Covey said, if there's an issue, start by thinking, could it be me?
yeah,
You know, and the chances are there's something you can do differently, even if it's, helping the wrong people to move on. It does
yes,
come down to you, you know.
absolutely. We often say in what we do, like life's a mirror. You get the people you deserve. So it's like if the team isn't performing, we don't look at the other people. We look at ourselves first. Um,
Yeah, quite,
Brilliant.
quite.
So lots of people we can help. Um, but maybe to start with, Juliet, we could look backwards and you could tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into business, and why this particular one for you.
Well, okay, so my journey, and I'm sure this isn't unusual, is kind of accidental.
Yep.
I'm definitely not an accidental entrepreneur, as opposed to it was never my plan. And I remember thinking as a young person, God, I'd hate to run a business. It must be so stressful, all the sort of like risk and stuff. And I didn't, yeah, so I didn't have like ambitions to become a millionaire or anything like that. It was just I just wanted a regular career. So the company was started actually by University of Leeds because we're very much about evidence-based approaches and like what actually is proven to work. So my
Brilliant.
parents are both psychologists, and the company was founded around their research. My mother, in particular, she's a retired professor at Leeds University. And then, so they did this, enormous piece of research into what makes effective leadership, but looking at it differently because previously it was all about bringing in American models, which were very homogenous. They were very much about being
Yep.
charismatic, about being
Yes.
visionary. And of course, what we know now is that some of the most charismatic and visionary people in the workplace can be some of the worst people to work for. And they can be
Yes.
the ones that cause, your corporate scandals and you know,
Mentioning their names.
it's no surprise that there's a huge overlap between, Fortune 500 CEOs and the prison population in terms of personality traits. You know what I mean? So anyway, so it was a very different approach, and it was also using more inclusive research as well, rather than just sort of saying because typically people were only in interviewing um, CEOs from America who all happen to be in a particular demographic. What
Yes.
makes you so great? And of course, they were saying, well, I'm visionary, I'm charismatic, I'm this, that. So it was a completely different approach, came up with completely different perspective. It was like, I really give bust a gut for people when they show that they care about me as a human being,
Yep.
when they've got integrity in their behavior, when they ask my opinion. It's all basic stuff, right?
Yep.
But it was revolutionary. And it's still, to be fair, many organizations still aren't doing leadership right, aren't asking the right questions, aren't
Yep.
expecting the right stuff from leaders, which is why, we're in business and why you and your coaches are in business too, right? But anyway, so it was founded around that because that then became a 360 tool. That research became a 360 assessment that organizations wanted to utilize, that became popular very quickly. And then over the last 26 years, 25 years, we have expanded that research and then taken it around the world. So we could,
Amazing.
because of the fact we publish our research in, journals and people use it for their PhDs, their master's degrees, and so on, we get to have this sort of global influence without, having to physically be present in other countries. So people get to hear about us, and then, and obviously we do a lot of word of mouth. So we get lots of clusters of organizations working with us because we've been recommended
Yes.
from one to another,
I can
and then,
imagine.
so that sort of thing. So that's how, sorry, the company was founded. I did join at the beginning because I was doing some research with my mum at the time, and then I just recently left university when the company was founded. I then did my master's in organizational psychology, so I was kind of committed to this field. And then I did a master's in positive organization development and change in America, which was very much about strategy and stuff. And I thought, actually, do you know, actually, I wouldn't mind having a go at running the company. And it happened to be a good time in
Brilliant.
terms of the previous managing director at the time leaving. So that's how I ended up where I am.
Brilliant. Wonderful. What a great story. And absolutely fascinating. And I don't know if you're aware of the unfortunate statistics of business survival, but um, basically, unfortunately, of 80% of businesses will fail in the first 5 years of operation, and of the
Mm,
20% that remain, 80% of those fail in the following 5 years. So just to get to 10 years is pretty special. Um,
really, that's
4% of
interesting.
businesses. So I keep saying, and I did say this last week, I will get the stats on 20 years because I'm 20 years too in this business. So I need to share that with other people. So it is quite a special thing to do. So well done to you and everyone in the organisation.
Thank
Um,
you.
while you were talking, and you mentioned obviously the difference between um, all the models based on US leaders, etc. And absolutely, I would agree. There's lots of different reasons why, especially here in the UK, we're different. If knowing that, do you see that different patterns across the world culturally? If you take the US and UK out, I'm thinking we did a little bit of work in East in the Asian market many years ago with my first business, and that, I mean, I don't remember leadership, but I remember presenting to a bunch of engineers, and I was totally stony faced. They never said a word. I got no feedback until afterwards when they said, "Oh, you did really well." But there was nothing, and honestly, it was just like, oh my God, it's like the worst thing I could ever have was no feedback. And then it was just, oh no, that was really good. So do you see different sort of areas of the world or cultures that have different types of leadership?
Yes and no. I would say different approaches to, if you want to call it exec education or like, workshops and stuff. So, for example, if I think about, um, I've had that sort of experience in Singapore,
Yes,
where, people will come up to you afterwards and say, I didn't want to say anything, but what you
yes,
described about what's not working is absolutely what's happening here. And
yes,
and then I remember doing an exercise in Russia where it was like, we used to do this exercise to help illustrate the difference between like, famous leaders and what you actually want in a
yep,
leader. And I asked them, we know we usually include the prime minister of the day, and we I remember naively asking them, tell me about Putin. Well, how would you describe his leadership? And I said, and after the sort of like silence, I kind of thought, oh my gosh, well, maybe I'll clarify that I don't need them to be critical. They can just say positive things about what they value in his
yes,
leadership. But even that didn't work. So, so obviously there are differences in that way, but ultimately, what we often do as a kind of like a warm-up exercise when we're working with a group of leaders is we ask them to describe their best boss.
yep,
Because, and so we sort of say to people, what is it that when you think about the best boss you ever had in your career, someone who was really competent, so they had to be someone who was actually got the job done, but they also made you want to go the extra mile when things were
yep,
tough. And then we ask them to think about it. Sometimes they discuss it in pairs and then they share their thoughts on it. And whether I've used that in China or Singapore or in Russia or with the American group or wherever it is in the world, the same characteristics always appear. It's the same things I mentioned at the beginning. This person valued me. They asked my opinion. They actually saw me as a human being. They were willing to admit when they made a mistake. They want, you find the same responses from people because
brilliant.
really good leadership is about meeting human needs, and
Yes,
they are the same around the
yes,
world. Now, there is research, of course, on the difference between what people value in terms of collectivist or individualistic cultures, but the majority of leadership research is based on personality, which is a
yes.
whole other kettle of fish. I must finish answering this question quickly, Chris, because I know I'm going on again.
No,
But
it's brilliant.
so there are some differences in terms of personality traits and what people want. But the majority of what predicts a good leader is not personality. Personality is a very small part of what predicts effective leadership. It's about the behaviors that you choose to enact,
Yep,
regardless of your personality type. And that we find is consistent in terms of
excellent.
people's, the things that really motivate them to do their work.
It's fascinating. I love that idea of modelling from others, because I find it makes it easier for the brain to sort of third party, doesn't it? They look, they're not looking at themselves and looking at somebody else and
Yes,
identify. And I
which is
do a lot
key.
of work with ex-rugby league coach, a guy called Tony Smith, who was coach at Leeds and all teams at various other places. And I know he tells the story of, and he always says he learned quite a lot pre being full-time professional as a rugby player and then a coach. He worked in one of the banks in Australia, and
Yeah.
he always tells the story of two different bosses. One where is basically they'd just say one of them would just shout tea. I mean, it was literally they'd just shout tea and expect a cup of tea turn up, and the other one took the time to speak to everybody every morning or at some point during the day,
Yeah.
and the difference and the modelling, and I've seen him because I've seen him in his environment in with his teams, and he will say hello. He will make a point of saying hello to everybody every day
Mm,
from junior to senior, players, staff, everybody, and it's
yeah.
just a quick handshake and how are you? But it is that human connection.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. No, we could definitely talk down this. But if we focus on the business for a little while, as you've grown the business, and as I say, the success of the longevity you have is brilliant. What are some of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome, Juliet?
I think one of the challenges that we've got, and that continues to be the case even though we're 25 years, is educating the marketplace.
Yes.
We work in a very crowded marketplace as well. So there's, so if you think about our core business, so consulting, is a very crowded
Yep.
market. In addition to that, the assessment space, so a large part of our business is just test
Yep.
publishing basically.
Yep.
And that's also a really crowded marketplace.
Yes.
And there are some really big players, of course, in both of those spaces
Yes.
that have got enormous marketing budgets and, all kinds of wonderful marketing, hooks, like things like, Lego bricks or, lovely graphics and, all kinds of things that are so pleasing to the eye. And a lot of people make decisions about things like leadership assessments based on what we call face validity, which is basically, does it look and feel nice?
Yep.
And people, so there's a lot of attraction in the competition, and we're having to start from a place of saying, yes, that stuff is great and it's good, but do you know what you're missing? You're actually missing over 85% of what actually makes an effective leader. And of course, if people are, the difficulty, of course, around educating the market, or your potential customers, I should say, is that people are often, quite protective of what they've made a decision about in the past. So they might have invested quite heavily in a
Yes.
certain type of assessment or a
Yep.
certain type of approach.
Yep.
And sometimes, even though they might cognitively be able to understand that actually there's an even better thing that we can introduce alongside, but they might have already committed to and sold to other people what currently exists. So I would say the fact that we need to help people to understand what's new about leadership and what is and what they, what might feel counterintuitive because they're so used to a particular approach.
Yep.
And then the fact that we're also asking them to really question what they've really committed to in the past. But ultimately, they, you know, of course we overcome it. We're in business still after 25 years. But the point is, that those are definitely hurdles to people,
Yes.
being able to get the results they actually want that they haven't been able to get
Yeah.
based on the previous decisions they've made, if that makes sense. So yeah, but those I would say those are the biggest challenges, all the noise and the
Yes.
re-education piece.
I can really understand that. I'm familiar with and work with a style of behavioural profiling that's v- I'm quite happy to say it's very basic. In what I do, it helps. It's a basic tool. It still increases value quite significantly at that level. It feels like you're the sort of the surgical tool that really helps leaders get the best from their team. Whereas the other tools are very much, for me, or the ones I use, are very much about everybody who, what are your styles and how can you work together. I've always felt there's so much room in the market for different tools. It's just as you say, positioning ourselves in a way that works, and overcoming the fact that people do get embedded with one particular style, one particular type, and then that's it. Isn't it? It's a brand. I mean, I guess it's brand recognition, isn't it? Well, we're this brand, and this is the best, and I've always used it, and yeah, I get that. That's fascinating. So I mean, you've used the word leader a lot. So would you say this is it? The focus is on purely leadership for what you do, because that for me is a very strong niche, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely leadership more than management. We do help increase management skills,
Yes.
so for example, if we do like a culture change program with an organization, then it's often the case that there's a performance management challenge, which is
Yes.
can only be fixed, of course, through both management skills like objective setting and clarity of expectations and all those things, holding people to account, and then but making sure that you do it in what we would call an engaging way. 'Cause
Yep.
our foundational leadership model is called engaging leadership. So we'd say, it's about helping people to develop their competencies or utilize their existing competencies in an engaging way because it's the engaging bit where you can really leverage people's potential.
Yes.
So it's leadership, but it's also we have done lots of unique research around team working as well. But again, like you said just now, it's not about exploring different personality styles or preferences on the team. And I do genuinely think these tools have utility and application.
Yes,
But it's saying, you know, that's one way of looking at a team. But actually, if you only look at personality styles or preferences and traits, then you're missing out on a huge amount of what makes a team effective. You know,
brilliant.
there's so much about a team that is about behaviors, processes, and approaches, and how the team, processes information, for example, together, how they communicate. And none of that stuff is actually predicted by personality. And so it's really important to, continue doing the personality stuff, but also
Yeah.
look at the behavioral stuff too.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think that's the point, isn't it? It's additional to rather than
Yeah,
instead of, and we
yeah.
therefore we can take away any form of competition. We're not competing. We absolutely sit alongside, which is brilliant. Yes, we could definitely talk a lot more. We must do talk a lot more about this perhaps later on. But in thinking about your business, continue to think about your business a little bit. What would you say, whether it's from the challenges or the successes you've had, are your biggest learnings about growing a successful business?
Oh, that's a question. Um, I would say that um, I mean, like every business, um, you can be really expert in inverted commas, but hiring the right people will always be critical to success. And even no matter how expert you are, you can make mistakes in hiring as well. And I think it's about you know, for me, the biggest lesson I've learned over the years, and I'm not saying I'm perfect at it yet, is about being really, really rigorous in stuff, but also listening to your gut. You know what I mean when it comes to hiring people, because you must absolutely make sure that you give every opportunity for every person to have a level playing field in terms of recruitment. Otherwise, you miss out on great talent. But ultimately, if one of the things we talk about a lot is the charisma effect. Really highly charismatic people can influence even the best trained assessors. And we
Yes.
think you see it in action. So we've been, for example, commissioned in the past to help to evaluate things like big graduate recruitment programs or and so in a course of that we'll do things like we'll observe what's called a wash up. So you have an amazing assessment center. People spend thousands on assessment centers, and all these candidates come along and they do the exercises that are really well designed exercises. They have these fantastically well trained assessors, a mixture of subject matter experts and people who actually live and breathe the jobs. And then you've got your psychologists or whatever it is. And then you have, of course, at the end of an assessment center, a wash-up session where everyone discusses the different candidates and looks at their test ratings and all that kind of stuff and exercises and that. And one of the things that makes my heart sink is when you hear one of the assessors saying, "Yes, I know that you know that Jane was a bit directive in that session, and yeah, she was a bit harsh, and her language wasn't great, and I know she didn't do brilliant in numerical reasoning, but there's something about her." You know what I mean? And it's that there's something about this charisma effect is so seductive for people, even when
Fantastic.
you're really highly, even when you're trained and experienced. So I would say my biggest piece of advice to people hiring as they grow their company is not to be seduced by the charisma effect, and make sure that you're using rigorous data. But then if something really feels off about somebody, there'll be a reason for that. There'll be lots of little things ticking off in
Yes.
your head that are going, actually, even though this person on paper looks perfect, there's something that, there might be a good reason. So it's like, discussing that with colleagues and stuff. So
And you might just
hiring, I
pick it
think, is the
up.
biggest challenge to growth. And hiring the right people is the biggest challenge to growth.
Yeah, no, brilliant. No, I totally agree. So I've got this belief, and but feel free to shoot it down. So I don't know why I'm bringing it up right now. But you said use the word gut, and I believe our subconscious is the most powerful computer in the world, but it can't communicate directly with us. So the only mode
Yeah.
is our gut. So it's actually going, there's something wrong here, but it has no language other than how we feel. And I honestly believe that's why the idea of using a gut is really, really valuable. But let's use some other that's for part of what we do, but that's perhaps the subliminal, unseen things. But as you say, if we discuss and talk about it, we probably might identify it was actually that thing they did, or that thing they said, or perhaps.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And like the thing is, like that, you can, like I've just said, it can go either way. You can
yes,
have a really good feeling about something that isn't someone that isn't supported by the evidence, or you can have a bad feeling about someone and you're not quite sure because the evidence looked like everything's all right. There was something you got written down anyway. But yeah, totally.
fascinating. No, absolutely fascinating. And I know you're aware we're a business coaching organisation. We've talked about already. I'm keen to know the best coaches you've worked with, whether that was business, sport, life in general. Who's had the biggest impact on you?
Um, I've worked with many coaches over the years. I think I mean my current chair is she's a great coach for me but actually the person that stands out most to me is the first chair that we ever had as a company. Um, because I don't know what it was about the coaching and thinking differently about stuff. And to be fair, I'm not sure if I'm fully answering your question, Chris, because it was a bit of a mentoring stroke coaching relationship.
It's all good. Yeah.
Definitely mentoring in there as well.
Yes.
But you know, the thing that made the biggest difference to me was being encouraged to trust myself,
Yeah.
and being encouraged to, take a leap,
Yeah.
um, and not sort of be held back by self-limiting beliefs. So a
Yeah.
bit of that, plus also the gentle guidance that you get from a good mentor, has been the most powerful influence on me, I would say, as a leader.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
But I think her coaching is hugely important. And of course, we tend to work with with more senior in our consulting practice. We tend to do more senior work, and of course, the good thing is that there's typically the resources for coaching. So
Yes.
we absolutely endorse coaching. We have some amazing um, coaches too, but on the assessment side of things as well, we want coaches everywhere
Yeah.
to be
Yes.
able to access our tools and use them in their own practice because coaching is so powerful. But like you said earlier on, Chris, if you can use some kind of tool, whether it's a free resource like the behavioral one that you referred to earlier on, or um, or one that you have to pay a minimal or even a large fee for, that can of course open up a whole new world of conversations, can't it, for the coach and for the leader?
Absolutely. I do. I really meant that. The tools you use are very effective. They have a level of basic. Basic doesn't mean unvaluable. It just meant they're really good across a whole a whole plethora of different businesses, different teams, different dynamics. It's when you get into specifics like leadership that I think there's so much more to be done and so much value in effective leadership. I have told the story a couple of times when I've been talking to people like this. The um, when I my first job was working over in Manchester for a computer company called Frantic Computer Systems, and the chairman, then chairman, and this is I won't say how long ago it was, but the then chairman was a classic 80s 90s chairman of the board, pinstripe suit, wavy silver hair, made and he came in and we were called in for an event 9:30 Monday morning. It was basically rouse the troops, and there was a guy called I looked him up since Sir Derek Allen James. Brilliant, really was very inspiring man. Walked in, gave us half an hour of just you know British engagement. I say it wasn't. It's as you say because it is quite different to what but it was still very charismatic, absolutely amazing. You can almost see looking across him. It was in a big auditorium. You can almost see the chests of everybody pumping up and because they look, we're and in half an hour that guy increased the performance of everybody by at least 20% for the next 6 to 12 months, without a doubt in my mind.
Wow.
Um, and did that. And everyone felt amazing. And as he then walked off, and he happened to come past me, I was at the end of the row, and I swear he looked at me. He didn't look at me, but he sort of looked at me and said, "I'm off for a game of golf now." And it was just, and I talk to leaders about this. His leadership is incredibly valuable, but it doesn't. And it can be delivered. Half an hour, he would have put a couple of million on the value of that company just by talking that way. It's such a valuable thing. So having a specific and special tool to help people improve that can add, hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds onto the bottom line of any business, I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. And also leadership on the flip side, when it's not there or it's not good or it's toxic, then it massively trashes companies.
100%, couldn't agree more. Yeah, really fast. We've seen that time and time again, and it's yeah, and it often happens in what I do when the original leader passes on to the next one, and they're very different. They were right as the number two for the leader, and doing the sort of perhaps more management role, let's say but leadership skills weren't in play, and yeah, I've definitely seen that happen too.
The thing is, though, as well, I hope you don't mind me sort of going off on a tangent,
No,
but
not at all.
if you are highly charismatic, like I assume that chair was, or if you're one of those people who you read about in the Harvard Business Review, like they used to remember this woman, she was a CEO of Southwest Airlines, and there was a whole piece about how they were, at the time they were transformative and they were doing really, really well. And she was famous because she didn't only know pretty much everyone's name, but everyone that wrote to her, she'd write personally back in like, proper writing and not just an
Brilliant.
email or whatever it was.
Yep.
And those people can be really inspiring, but they can also be quite, in a weird way, demotivating. Because it's like, well, if you're not naturally charismatic, and if
Yes.
you don't have a good memory, and if you can't get around the whole building and say good morning to people, then we end up holding ourselves up to an impossible standard. But
Yeah.
what I'd love people to understand is that leadership does not depend on being charismatic. Some of the best leaders are not at all charismatic, but they know how to, talk about optimism and
Yes.
talk in ways that, excite people about the future. They absolutely don't have to have brilliant memories and know everybody's names. But there's lots of ways that you can show your humanity and the fact that you value people that are somewhere between what you're doing now and those people that we sort of read about. There's a
Yeah.
huge amount of opportunity there for us to be more effective as leaders without having to be those, you know, unicorns, for want of a
Brilliant.
better word. So I'd love people to know that about leadership and not think that. Um, and the other thing is leaders can be made as much as they're born,
Yep.
because if people get the right reflection and they get the right coaching and support, then absolutely anybody can learn to be an effective leader.
Yes. Yes. No, you've just flashed something in my mind. So through a couple of things, we're lucky enough, as you know, we're global, but certainly a national organisation. So we have a 2 day national event every year, and we have some of the best speakers and leaders around, from around the world, not just from the UK. And we were lucky enough to have Kevin Sinfield speak last year, who was the ex-captain of the Leeds Rhinos rugby team, had done a lot of extreme events to support his friend Rob Burrows, who has
Oh
MND.
yeah, yeah. I thought I'd
You know,
heard of him. Yeah.
you
Hmm.
yeah, but he was such a understated leader,
Mm.
and there was just he was just talking, and he was very not monotone's the wrong word, but it wasn't a performance. It was just him
Yeah.
talking to. I think there was probably about 1,300 of us in the room, and you could have heard a pin drop.
Wow.
You absolutely could have heard a pin drop, and there was no raising of the voice. There was nothing other than him talking
Yeah.
about things in a way. So yeah, that took me back. Then we've got other people who will jump up and down and do various different things. We had, at the same time, we had interesting enough. Guy called Gary Vaynerchuk, who you either definitely know or you definitely don't. He's an American marketeer who has done really, really well in business, and he's got sort of 50 million followers or something. He's a very, very influential, and he was very much talking about when you could engage with as many people as you could on a regular basis. So yeah, just thinking about that event and then different people that we had there
Mm.
was quite interesting to see the variance. And I think the year before we had Deborah Meaden from the Dragon's Den,
Oh yeah.
and again she was really quite understated, quite quiet,
Yeah.
and she was literally saying she actually puts a persona on for
Oh
Dragon's Den.
really?
Yeah, she's a sweetest person. She really is one of the sweetest people, and she actually didn't want to speak, so she was actually interviewed and sort of like I think they call them firesides now. I don't know whether it is, but
Yeah,
sat on a sofa and was interviewed by James Vincent, who does our national podcast interviews. And yeah, just really interesting. Just now you said it, the different personalities of people that are clearly effective, certainly effective business people and effective leaders. And
yeah,
it's yeah, I think what you said there, and I think it's very true in coaching too. Is finding finding what we I often call it. Find your super strength. What's your
mm,
super strength, and what's your super strength in leadership? It can be charisma, it can be plain speaking, it is, but there's something that we all have, I think. And as you say, we can, and if we don't have it, we can learn it. It's not something we're born with at all.
mm.
I'm pretty sure of that. Um, so, just thinking, Julia, from whether it's the coaches or the people you work with, um, or chairs, etc. Do you have any favourite? Have you picked up any favourite quotes or sayings about business or success or even leadership that you find yourself using on a regular basis that you can share with us?
Um, there's I suppose trying to think what would be the best one. Um, I think probably the best one for this context would be, and this applies, whether you're, and I'm sure your coaches will already be aware of this, but so forgive me if I'm sort of,
All
telling you
good.
what you already know. But um, what we find so often is that we need to remind leaders and customers that you've got to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. So it's like, you can't underestimate the power of tailoring a message and, finding out about people so that you know what it is that they want. I don't mean in an NLP sense. I mean in the sense of, actually taking the time to get to know
Yes.
people, to get to know teams, get to know clients, whatever it is. Now, of course, as coaches, you'll naturally do that. But the point is that I think that leaders far too often, and a lot of work that we do is helping to smooth the process of change. And that's a great example of where organizations and their leaders often still, and it amazes me because we've done decades, of years, sorry, decades of research on what not to do when you're trying to lead a change initiative, and yet
Yes.
people don't get it. You still hear people saying, it's going to be painful, but we just need to get over this pain point, and then it'll all smooth out. And of course, we all know it won't.
Absolutely.
And we all know that even if it does get less painful, you're never going to get what you could have got if you'd handled it well. So that's a great example at macro level of you've got to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. You can't
Yes.
force through anything at any level. Um, and so that for me, I think is the most
Brilliant.
useful quote to have in mind.
Love it. Love it. And similarly, any favourite books or podcasts you can recommend about anything at all?
So, oh, yeah, I was thinking about this earlier on. And I think we had a brief chat about it before this podcast interview. I do love I love to be able to switch off with a true crime podcast. I
Brilliant.
like ones like Dateline NBC where they take you on a journey, and there's this guy called Keith Morrison with this amazing voiceover. He's got a voice for voiceovers. He does the interviews and stuff. I love to listen to Keith Morrison talking about a grisly murder. But it's so funny, isn't it, that I think when you listen to a murder podcast, you think, well, thank God it wasn't me. It was, does that make me safer? I don't know. Anyway, but in terms of books, I've as a as an SME owner, I've always really valued a guy called Jeffrey Fox. Now, his books are somewhat old now. He's like one of his most famous books is How to Be a Rainmaker, and
Right.
another one's How to Be a Marketing Superstar. And they're really great 101s for how
Yeah.
to really market your own small business. Um, my only reservation about Jeffrey Fox is I've found myself on his mailing list. I don't know how because I hadn't. Well, I think it's because I was so impressed by him. I said, "Oh, if you're ever in London, can I take you out for dinner?"
Brilliant.
Well, that was about 20 years ago. But
Brilliant.
I am on his mailing list, and I keep getting these somewhat Trumpian mass mailings. So if that's not your political persuasion, then you know, just be wary of the Jeffrey Fox potential political persuasion. But I do think his books are really good.
Brilliant. Well, Jeffrey Fox. We'll look those up. Thank you. That's and I mean, it's interesting you say they're quite quite a lot quite old or whatever the phrase you word. I personally believe most of the best business learning was developed about 100 years ago. You know,
Yeah, and it's basic stuff, isn't it? Like,
it's all basic stuff.
can I give you one of my favorite Jeffrey Fox quotes?
Please.
It's you're not at lunch to eat lunch. And that for me was really transformative. You know, you take the client out for lunch. You're not there to actually have lunch unless it's one that you know really well and you have a long. But if you're not, it's like don't choose something that's really fiddly to eat and you can't focus on the can't concentrate on the conversation. Really basic stuff like that, which I
Yes.
absolutely love.
No, I really like that. That's really interesting because that's a different level as well. Because it's like, yeah, don't, because I'm classic for getting a spot of like spaghetti sauce on my
Yeah.
shirt. So like, why am I eating spaghetti when I'm going to look? Yeah, interesting. But I do think, and also I don't know if this is he's referred to this as well. I think one of the things about building rapport and empathy is breaking bread, the act of breaking bread, and it doesn't matter what you're eating, but it is that fact that you're if you get the opportunity to eat lunch, eating lunch or together is something that's very, very
Mm.
valuable.
It is. But just make sure that you don't eat something that means you can't talk or get
I
spaghetti down
love
your
that.
throat.
Yeah, and honestly, I can honestly say I don't have that many business lunches anymore. But I don't think I've ever gone. Oh, I better not have that because I'll be chewing forever. I'll just go. Oh, what's my favourite?
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, but then
Yeah,
that's
I know. I'm not joking. It is transformative.
yeah, brilliant. I will search him up. That's fantastic. Thank you for those recommendations. And similarly on the learning track, what would you say you've learned about yourself throughout your journey so far, Juliet?
Oh my God, so much. Um, um, I oh gosh, I need to sort of. I'd say that I still have a healthy. I think it's. I hope it's healthy dose of imposter syndrome. So I still like I was on a panel last week for one of our psychology, industry conferences, and I was like, oh God, me talking about the future of leadership assessment. But I thought, you know what? Just get over yourself. You know, whether or not you are whether or not you're the right person, you've got a story to tell. And also
Absolutely.
going back to, people want to hear the story and, there's going to be a different angle. And going back to, Jeffrey Fox again, you know, if you don't promote your business, then nobody else will. You had a lovely quote earlier on when we chatted, Chris, about the blowing your own trumpet before. And it's like a bit like that. Jeffrey Fox says, if you don't shout about your business, nobody else will. So you blooming well better do it. So I've learned that I've got to push myself out of my comfort zone and talk unashamedly how brilliant we are as a company. And we are genuinely brilliant, but I've
Absolutely.
got to get over my own imposter syndrome and really talk about how great we are, because otherwise I'm doing my company and my colleagues a disservice.
Brilliant. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If it helps, there is we talked about Stephen Bartlett a little while ago. He's got a great quote about imposter syndrome that I really like,
Oh yeah,
and it says he loves imposter syndrome because it means he's in the right room and he's probably going to learn something.
that's true. That's true. And it keeps you, the adrenaline is good for keeping you focused too, right?
It's got so many different benefits
Yeah,
to it.
yeah, that's true.
I think it's just when it becomes unhealthy that it needs paring back, if that makes sense. It's great to go into a room feeling right. I've got to be on it here, but I think
It's true, it's true. And when you can sometimes you hear like a keynote of somebody who clearly hasn't got imposter syndrome, or maybe they have and they're just really, really good at covering it. And often you think, God, that was, you know, a bit, you know, boring or pointless or whatever it is. Some people, sometimes I feel like sometimes if they haven't got, if they really think that they should be there and they want to listen to their own sound, their own voice, sometimes they can be the worst presentations because actually they don't realize they don't know the latest stuff.
yes,
So yeah, I can see that.
mentioning no names at the moment. So just thinking overseas. But we'll move on. Absolutely. So, Juliet, we have a phrase in Action Coach or a definition of a true business, which is a commercial profitable enterprise that works without its owners. I'm keen to know what your thoughts are on that as a definition.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working towards that. I mean, I do worry about real world group in terms of, um, I need to do more to make it not dependent on me. I do
Yeah,
need to do more of that because, I still do an awful lot of the thought leadership and stuff. I do have some brilliant colleagues, um, you know, and you know, I'm particularly building our expert, leadership expert sort of core. Um, so I think I think that's a really good definition of a business. And I'd say that we are getting there,
brilliant.
as a business. So useful reminder. Thank you.
I think I often put a can in there, i.e., it can work without its owners, because I do believe if we love some or part of what we do, that we don't have to leave the business, but it's about getting to a point of choice
Yes.
and doing the stuff we really love. I think it was Brian Tracy actually said the best and most successful organisations and teams are the ones where most people spend most of their time doing the three things they really love and they're really good at.
Yeah.
And I think that could be true. And I absolutely love coaching people to success, and especially to that point of being able to exit. And I don't think I'll ever stop specifically. I will reduce what I do, but no, I don't think I'll ever stop by choice, just because it's so rewarding. But it's moving towards it. So brilliant. So. Looking forward to then, Juliet, what does the future look like for you guys, and what challenges do you think you might face, if any?
I mean, a big challenge for us at the moment, of course, is the rise of AI in
Yes.
um, in the world of business in general, but particularly in the a lot of people, because obviously as you can probably tell, we work with more with larger businesses, because they don't tend to invest in leadership development. Organizations don't
Yeah.
until they're a certain size. But so with that in mind, a lot of them are buying, enterprise level HR and L&D solutions.
Yes.
And as part of that, they'll typically have a built-in assessment.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll be absolutely rudimentary.
Yeah.
It won't be anywhere near as sophisticated
No.
as what they need. So luckily, most of them still, look to more sophisticated suppliers like us and our competitions. But sort of linked to that, particularly in the personality space, there's a lot of rise of the use of AI. And
Yeah.
I've written about this. I genuinely don't think that AI can or ever will be able to assess leadership, because yes, it's quite good at assessing personality, but if leadership is those things that you're doing all the time, and they're not all online, they're
Yeah.
not all measured digitally, and therefore AI will not be able to get enough of a measure of a person to be able to assess their leadership, on its own. So so but of course, organizations are always looking for silver bullets, and as long as you know big software firms try to persuade them that actually their leadership assessment that's built in is all that they need, or that AI can answer all the questions that they've got, then unfortunately, that will that will increase. So those are two things that we're conscious of,
Yeah.
and I think that on the positive side, well, there's two things on the positive side. One is that consulting certainly is going to be a very, very, very long time. I mean, well, obviously see how this quote ages, but before robots can facilitate a board workshop
Yeah.
effectively, or
Absolutely.
a simulated human being, whatever it is. And the other thing is, one of the big things that AI is the sort of implementation at pace of AI is creating is a huge amount of disruption. And um, because of the pace of change, people need leadership to be optimal
Yeah.
yesterday, you know. So there's a huge opportunity for organizations like us who are expert in helping people to smooth change. So that's the plus side. So it's got a flip side as the
Yes.
threat that we face as an organization.
No, I think that's yeah. I would imagine that's bang on, and I guess there is there is similarities with what I do is answers to business problems. AI can find those for you, but it's the empathy that comes with it. It's the fact that you're working with a human being, and I fundamentally believe for most service based businesses that there is a long enough period, irrespective of the quality of the outcome using AI in some way, that there's still going to be a very large part, a significant part of the population that will, for a very long time, will want to work with a human being, irrespective of
Mm.
the cost. if that makes sense. That will
Yeah.
have a belief that they're going to get a better outcome working with a human being than not. And I think for lots of different reasons, but certainly things like the human condition, the empathy that you can't really. I don't think AI will ever. It will might be able to mimic empathy, but it won't ever be able to feel empathy. That
No, and also, some of the scary research on where AI is doing harm to humans
yes,
is when it's taking an inappropriate
yes,
role, replacing humans in whether it's coaching or counseling and things like that, so
absolutely,
I
and
think that people's awareness of that will probably grow at the same time as the industry does. So, like I said,
yeah,
like you said, Chris, people they might actually, start to value humans again more. Because I know there's an increase in digital coaching using AI machines, but hopefully there'll be a sort of turn of that tide as well, because I think there's more
I
risk at the
think so.
moment than is acceptable.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's just the right way to think. Is like we have to look at how what the challenges are to any from anything, but also the benefits. And I think there
Mm.
are lots of benefits. The productivity benefits AI gives us at that very basic level of being
Yeah,
able to do something
absolutely.
more is wonderful. I Interesting of Gary Vaynerchuk, who I mentioned, who was our keynote speaker at this year's conference, and he said I predict that not very far away people will get jobs will just be different. So people would get paid to go for walks with people. It's literally I want to interact with a human being. So therefore,
Yeah,
in what I do, I want to interact with a human being, irrespective of how the cost effectiveness of some other solution. I want a human being, and there'll always be in for a reasonable long period of time. Enough of that, I think. Um,
yeah, I think you're right.
so, final question: what would be the best advice you could give an 18-year-old you if you could go back in time and do that, Juliet?
Oh, um, I would say to yeah, I'd say just, just trust that the future will work out for you, you know, because I think I used to worry too much about what would happen and, oh, I wouldn't want to do this and I wouldn't want to do that. And actually I've ended up, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, in a role that I never thought I'd ever want, and I love it. I absolutely love the fact that we're able to influence people's working lives in a positive way, and I absolutely love being able to make a lot of decisions or have the casting vote on things. I'll obviously love having a brilliant team that I can consult with, but I actually don't mind the risk of being in this role, and I never would have thought that at age 18. So I think I would like to have not wasted so much time
Wonderful.
worrying about what ifs.
What a great, what a great, yeah, way of looking at things. So there is a great quote. So you like crime podcasts, and I love films. I just watch films. That's my thing. I'm very visual. So one of the quotes I love, which is from the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel,
Oh yeah.
so, is it'll all be right in the end, and if it's not all right, it's not the end.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
I think it's bang on. There's different ways of looking at it, but I just love that phrase, and it's okay that we'll go through. Of course, there will be challenges, but it'll be right in the end. So,
Yeah. Oh,
Juliet, it's
that's
been fascinating to talk to you, Dan. I really could talk to you all afternoon, but for now,
great.
thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thank you.